Hello everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to the channel. I am here today with episode 2 of Book versus Movie. And today we are going to be looking at Stephen King's The Shining versus Stephen King's The Shining. So this is one of those kind of unique situations where the author of the book, Stephen King, also wrote the teleplay, in this instance, the screenplay, of the movie version, or in this case, the miniseries version. So I know when most people think of The Shining, the first thing that's going to come to mind is going to be the Kubrick directed film. And frankly, that's the first thing that comes to mind to me as well, because that is the original way that I consumed the story of The Shining, that's backwards, whichever way we want to cut it. That was my first introduction of Danny and Jack and Wendy and the Overlook and The Shining itself and all of that fun stuff. And so when I think The Shining, that's immediately what my mind goes to. But I figured most people that would do something similar to this, where they're comparing the book and the movie, would go straight for the film because it is so popular and, so good, frankly. But I decided to go with the miniseries that Kubrick wrote. This was directed by Mick Garris, who did a number of other miniseries that Stephen King did, or based off of Stephen King novels, I should say. But this one was also written by Stephen King, as I mentioned. And so that's the reason I wanted to pit this one against the novel itself. So some little tidbits of trivia, I guess. Stephen King, as most people know, did not like Kubrick's version of The Shining at all. He was publicly vocal about his dislike for the film because Kubrick went in a much different way than King probably liked compared to his novel. And because of that, he decided he wanted to do this teleplay. And so this is a much closer adaptation to the book than anything that Kubrick presented in his film. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see which of these two I enjoyed better. Which one won, the book or the movie? And I know, again, it's a miniseries, but I'm calling it a movie because it fits the title of the video series better. So episode 2, book versus movie, Stephen King's The Shining from 1977 versus the miniseries from 1997. Which one does it better? Well, let's dive right in. Just like with Book versus Movie Episode 1, I want to say right at the start that this is going to be a spoiler-filled review. There will be spoilers for the miniseries, for the book, and I will probably talk a little bit, even though this video is not at all about the film. There are some moments where I do plan on talking about the Kubrick film a little bit, so there will be spoilers for that as well. So if you do not want anything spoiled, please consume those 3 pieces of media before watching this if you care about spoilers. Otherwise, stay tuned. If this was a review, this would be spoiler-free. This is not a review. This is a more in-depth look at specifically these 2 pieces of media, and a little bit bringing in the Kubrick film as well. Okay, so you have been warned, there will be spoilers. So the very first change I want to talk about was kind of a big one, and I will say I read the novel and then I watched the miniseries, so that was the order of me consuming these. And I feel like that's probably the best way to do it because obviously, no matter how long a miniseries is, and this one is like almost, 5 hours, 5.5 hours, it is 273 minutes according to the back of the DVD box here. So no matter how long it is, you can only fit so much. You can fit a lot more in the novel. So it makes sense to me to read the novel first and then move to the adaptations of it. So that's what I did in this case. And the first change that I noticed that I want to talk about is going to be of the previous caretaker, Delbert Grady. So in the book, Grady in the Kubrick film, actually, Grady is the year's previous caretaker, the winter caretaker of the Overlook, and he eventually went mad. The Overlook took him over, and he killed both of his daughters, who were not twins, unlike in the Kubrick film. In the novel, they're not twins; they're just 2 girls, his daughters, and his wife. So he kills them, and then he eventually kills himself, and then that kind of gives precedence for the reason that he's in this hotel again this following year while Jack's there. In the miniseries, however, we find out right at the get-go that Grady was a single man with no kids, no family, and he did a pretty bang-up job watching the Overlook the previous winter. And that is told to us by, I believe the character's name is Watson. Yes, Watson. And so Watson is known as, in the novel, as the foul-mouthed caretaker. But in the miniseries, and probably because it is a miniseries, it was aired on ABC back in 97. Because of that, he is a much more mild-mannered individual than he is in the novel, which really is taking away some of the more fun moments with him, some of the cool characteristics that he has, at least some of the more memorable characteristics that he shares in the novel. And so you strip that of him, he becomes just another character. Nothing about him really stands out. He's there to perform a function, and that's really it. And that's to kind of give some backstory into the Overlook, and of course talk about the creeping boiler, which plays a big part in the novel and in the miniseries. But this was such a weird change to me, given the fact that Grady shows up later on in this miniseries as like the bartender of the Overlook. Now, I understand that not everybody that is showing up in the Overlook later in the miniseries is someone that has died at the Overlook, or even in the novel. There's not someone that has died at the Overlook necessarily, because not that many people could have died at the Overlook Hotel. But that said, it is safe to presume that these people are at least dead. And we have nothing telling us that Grady's dead. At least if it is, I completely missed it. So correct me. Anything I'm saying here, please, if I am wrong, correct me down in the comments below, because, I did take notes during while I was watching the miniseries, but not while I was reading the book. And so I may have just I made a mistake on something, misunderstood something, whatever the case is. So if you see any mistakes, please call them out in the comments below. I don't have any problem with that. But that said, I don't believe it is ever stated that Grady is dead at all. And so the fact that he shows up here later as one of the ghosts, he actually shows up as the bartender in the miniseries, which is different than both the novel and the Kubrick film. But I don't like this change because of that. It doesn't really make sense at all. But what it does do is immediately sets itself apart from the Kubrick film, because one of the most defining images of the Kubrick film, of course, is going to be the twin girls that we see. And that is just something that is not a part of this whatsoever, because the character that was supposed to have killed these girls is a completely different character. So this was a weird change that I really didn't like. I don't know why. I'm not sure why King decided to make this change, but so for this one, I have to give the advantage to the novel. The second big change in the miniseries is the addition of Alcoholics Anonymous. So in the novel, Jack's come to Jesus moment with his drinking comes after he and his buddy are out drunk driving, and they think they hit someone on a bike. And from there, they just stop cold turkey. They realize, shit, we could have killed someone. We need to stop this. And so they do. They stop drinking and they're done cold turkey. In the miniseries, Jack finds Alcoholics Anonymous after, he goes and he beats up the student, and then he breaks Danny's arm, which is really the catalyst for him to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. This edition of Alcoholics Anonymous is... I don't like it. I much prefer the cold turkey approach that King takes. Now, I have not read Dr. Sleep, but I will mention that from my research I was doing on The Shining, I believe that Stephen King adds in Alcoholics Anonymous to Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. I don't know that to be a fact. That's just kind of what I picked up in my research. But the worst part of the addition of this AA is that it takes Jack away from one of the most important character building, relationship building scenes that the novel has. And that is the moment in the doctor's office after Danny gets stung by all the wasps, which, man, what a disappointing scene. That wasp scene is so cool in the novel, and it's done so poorly in the film, So at the end of this, I kind of talk about some small things that I noticed, differences that were worth noting to me. And I'll talk about that a little bit then. But I'll just say I was so disappointed by the wasp scene in the miniseries. But anyway, so after he goes to the doctor, in the novel, this is really where all of the dirty laundry is aired. It's the first time that divorce is mentioned out loud. Jack even admits out loud that he on some level, broke Danny's arm, which is not at all expressed that way in the miniseries. This scene really gives a lot of depth emotionally to these two characters of Wendy and Jack. And the fact that it's only Wendy at the doctor's office in the miniseries and she's talking to this doctor that she just met is, it is a complete waste of an excellent opportunity to really help build this relationship that is severely lacking in the miniseries. And so I really dislike the addition of Alcoholics Anonymous. King doesn't go anywhere with it. You know, eventually they get snowed in. He's supposed to be calling into these meetings, but he doesn't, and nothing really comes of it. There isn't like a blow up moment between Wendy and Jack because he stopped going to AA. Nothing. It's just, it seems like a silly addition that adds nothing to it. I hope, if what I've read about Dr. Sleep is correct, that they handle it in a more meaningful and impactful way in Dr. Sleep than they did in this miniseries, because it just seems entirely pointless. So this is one, the Alcoholics Anonymous edition, I have to give to, hang on. Before I do that, let me mention also, in the miniseries, Jack's sobriety is only about 5 months long, where in the novel, by the time they get to the Overlook, he's like 14 to 15 months sober. So that gives a lot more depth and a lot more meaning to Jack's sobriety in the novel than it does in the miniseries. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I just didn't like Jack. Not because he was only sober for X amount of time, but because the way they build him, it's all he's thinking about, all he cares about is drinking. And that seems to infect everything he does and really helps or really hurts the relationships that they're trying to build, that Mick Garris and Stephen King are trying to build in the miniseries. So because of that, the advantage goes to, once again, the novel. Something else that King introduces in the miniseries that was not in the book is the kind of what Danny's abilities are, or what his shining powers are. So in the miniseries, there's a flashback scene shown where Jack and Danny are at a basketball game. And Danny makes the backboard explode for whatever reason. And then later on, Jack tries blaming Danny's powers on the destruction of both the CB radio and the snowmobile. So this is not at all present in the novel. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain this is not present at all in the novel. And I have no clue why King decides to add this to the miniseries teleplay. It makes no sense. He doesn't do anything with it at all, much like Alcoholics Anonymous, but probably even lesser. It just feels like one of those ideas that is introduced in order to kind of separate it from the book, but it adds nothing. And it felt a little silly, just because especially if you've read the novel, you understand that this is not really what his powers are about. And I guess in the beginning, they also, in Halloran and Danny's first interaction, Danny does his like thought bomb or whatever, his shining powers to Halloran, which like knocks him back and gives him a nosebleed and everything. But it also explodes one of the back tail lights on Halloran's car, which is not something that happens in the novel. So I don't know why this is added. It seems completely pointless, and it's not something I particularly enjoyed. And so because of that, because of the useless addition to that, I'm going to give the shining powers of Danny the advantage to the novel. And a third thing that King and Garris add into this miniseries that adds nothing of value is the ghostly moments of the miniseries. So what makes The Shining, the book, so strong is that it is a horrifying ghost story in a much different way than a haunted house tale. It's much deeper than that. It is more psychological than that. In the miniseries, though, we get chairs falling all over. We get music playing out of nowhere, which of course that is in the miniseries or in the novel, but it's done just better. We get people being locked indoors, like balls rolling around the hallways at points, scaring people. I mean, it's just, it's supposed to scare the viewer. I understand why they put it in, but it is not scary at all. It's not done to any positive effect and just seems like another thing to add in to separate it from the novel. So I don't know. It's just another pointless moment, a pointless addition to me. So again, the advantage is going to the novel. I mentioned a bit earlier that the length of Jack's sobriety really played a factor in how I felt about him. But even more than that, just this entire family dynamic is lacking in the miniseries, which really hurts the thing overall. In the novel, there is a gradual degradation of the relationship of these three characters. Jack starts out as a sober, likable guy who really genuinely feels like he's turned a corner in his life and is ready to start afresh. Or anew, I guess I should say, because afresh is not a word. But in the miniseries, though, Jack, he's never likable. He starts off as a jackass and doesn't ever really turn any corner. I guess maybe at the very end, you kind of see that, yes, he does love his family, but man, that's way too late to introduce that idea or that feeling into this story, because at that point, you're 5.5 hours in and you just don't care. At least I didn't. And so just that whole family dynamic is built so well in the novel and so piss poorly in the miniseries that it just really made me dislike this entire family. So because of that, I have to give the family dynamic the advantage to the novel. One big element that Kubrick left out of his film adaptation of The Shining was the topiary, so these hedge animals. These hedge animals play a major part in the novel, and they actually play a rather large part in the miniseries as well. And much to my surprise, even though this was from 1997, I thought they did a really strong job with the effects of this topiary. It was just really cool watching these hedges come to life in front of my eyes. It was so fun to see. Though I think the novel probably does the depth of the topiary, which sounds so silly, but I guess it's true. It does it a little bit better in the novel, but just seeing it, the visualization of these hedge animals encroaching on these characters was really cool. And even though they play a lesser role in the end of the film, than they do in the end of the miniseries, rather than they do at the end of the novel, I think it's okay because they don't add a whole lot to the end of the novel. So I didn't mind that at all. So for the addition of the hedge animals, I'm going to give that advantage to the miniseries. It's the first time I'm giving the advantage to the miniseries. So will it be the last? Let's keep going. This is something that's kind of small, I guess, but it's something I picked up on for whatever reason. In the Kubrick film and in the miniseries, behind the bar in the lounge, there is a mirror. In the Kubrick film, they use the mirror quite a lot. In the miniseries, they use it one notable time to show people popping up behind Jack as he's at the bar. But in the novel, Jack specifically says that he is glad there's not a mirror behind the bar, because then he would just basically be looking at himself and be ashamed of himself, is kind of what I got from it. That's not at all what the line is, but it's something similar to that, or to that effect. And so the idea that they add this in when it is specifically noted that it is not that it's not there in the novel, I think was so interesting. And I would imagine that the reason they do this is strictly a practical reason. It's more interesting for the filmmaker to film something when there's a mirror back there, as opposed to it just being a blank wall with nothing on it. And so I don't know that one is better than the other. So I'm not giving the advantage goes neither way. But I think it's just interesting to point out because of the fact that it's explicitly listed in the novel that there is no mirror behind the bar, when in the miniseries and in the film, there definitely is. So the advantage goes to no one in this instance. The miniseries really neuters what's probably my favorite character from the book, and that's the character of Halloran. All of his cool moments that he has in the novel are essentially gone in the miniseries. So after Halloran gets the call from Danny and he's going to make his way to help them, on his way he meets a boatload of interesting characters. First off, he gets pulled over on the way to the airport, and then he meets this really interesting woman at the airport who happens to have shining powers. They don't talk about it, but it's implied. And then he meets a couple more people that all have powers, all have the shining in some small way. And all of these characters are missing from the miniseries completely. They do add one lady who says that she'll call ahead once he lands in Colorado. She'll call ahead so that he can get snow tires put on or change put on his tires. But that's it. That's the least interesting character of all of the cool ones he meets. So that was disappointing. But the biggest part that I wanted to see done in the miniseries because it's completely lacking from the Kubrick film was something in the novel at the very end. So in the novel, after the Overlook has gone up in flames, Halloran walks into the shed where they keep all of the Denver croquet mallets, and he's in there for a couple minutes, and eventually the hotel starts taking him over, and he thinks to himself, I need to kill Wendy and Danny. It's for their own good. Danny's just a pain in the butt. Like, this will be best for them. It only lasts for about a minute, but man, it's such a cool moment. Like, it's one of my favorite moments in the entire novel because I didn't know it existed. Because like I said, it wasn't in the Kubrick film at all, and it's not something I've heard anybody mention previously. But it's such a cool moment that is just completely gone in the miniseries. And I really, really wanted to see that moment happen. Now, I understand that moment is internal in the novel, so it's difficult to do that in the miniseries, but I don't know, get creative, do something. Don't leave out one of the coolest moments in the book because you can't think of a way to add it in. I don't know. So that was super disappointing to me. So the character of Halloran is awesome in the novel, and it's just not at all interesting in the miniseries. So this is another instance where with the character of Halloran, I give the advantage to the novel. I mentioned earlier that I didn't like the addition of all these like silly ghostly moments. Well, at the end, they literally have Wendy running around yelling at ghosts. It is absolutely silly and just so stupid. And also, instead of having Wendy stab Jack in the back with a knife, in like they do in the novel, they have her hit him over the head with a Denver croquet mallet. So, advantage, I'm gonna drop it, novel. The ending of the novel is much different than what Kubrick presented in his film adaptation of this story. Rather than Jack freezing to death out in the hedge maze, instead, in the novel, basically the spirits have taken over him at that point, but he finds himself, for lack of a better word, long enough to commit suicide. And then, because no one has messed with the boiler all day, it creeps up enough and eventually explodes, and that's what takes down the Overlook. In the miniseries, they take a much more melodramatic approach to it, where Jack makes a conscious decision not to release the pressure on the boiler so that it will explode. Now, I much prefer the inevitability idea versus the melodramatic idea that the miniseries presents, because the character of Jack is not melodramatic in this thing in the least. Like, he's just a jerk throughout most of it. And so the idea that they add this in at the end is just kind of too little too late. And so this is another one where the ending, the advantage goes to the novel. So the final big item I want to talk about, big difference I want to talk about, comes in the post-climax scene, which is present in both the novel and the miniseries, but not at all in the Kubrick film. But in the novel, Halloran comes back and visits Wendy and Danny about a year later. Wendy is about to start a new job, and Danny is, he's doing pretty well. He still has some nightmares as they talk about, but he's doing much better, all things considered. And that's really the end of it. They have this fun, charming little moment between Halloran and Danny, and that's that. We end it. In the miniseries, though, it picks up 10 years later, and Danny is about to graduate, or he is graduating. They're at his graduation from high school. Halloran comes up, and Wendy owns an art gallery at this point, and Danny grabs his diploma, turns around, and there is a ghost figure of Jack, and he's there to just tell him how proud he is. And it's just like, oh my God. It was just so stupid. It did nothing for me. Jack is never built up as a good father in the miniseries. At least I didn't see it. I didn't believe it at all. And so to add in this moment at the end, it just felt hollow and completely out of place. So for the post-climax, I should also mention that in the miniseries, there's another scene at the very, very end that shows, like, pans over the rubble of the Overlook and then shows a sign that says the Overlook is being rebuilt in whatever year it is. And so I guess it's to imply that there could be a sequel. I don't know. It was silly and stupid. So the ending, the post-climax moment, the advantage goes once again to the novel. Okay, so the next items I'm going to talk about are just little small things that really have no significance at all, really, but I noticed them, so I wanted to talk about them. So with the miniseries, first off, I love that Ross and Monica Geller's dad is playing Allman in the miniseries. I don't know who that actor's name is, but that was fantastic to see. Staying with Allman, in the miniseries, he talks about the fact that the Overlook has turned a profit, or stayed in the black, which just means they've turned a profit, ever since 1975. Whereas in the novel, the first time they turned a profit was actually the year prior, which is why they hold Allman in such high regard, because he's the only one that's been able to help the Overlook turn a profit. And that's kind of the reason they deal with his unique and challenging personality, because he was able to make them money. So I thought that was a kind of a strange change between the novel and the miniseries. The fact that Halloran is not the one to give the family the tour of the kitchen just bothered the hell out of me. I mean, he's the chef. Why in the hell is the caretaker, Watson, giving this tour? That was in the miniseries, and it made absolutely no sense to me. That bugged me so much. The acting in the miniseries really hurt so much of what Garrus and King were trying to do. Specifically, the relationship between Danny and Halloran, which is probably my favorite relationship presented in the novel. It is so poorly done in the miniseries, and it's mostly because the acting is so bad. I think the actor that plays Danny is just, he was not good, unfortunately. And the actor that played Halloran, again, just not good. And so these two actors that were not very well cast, I would say, them playing off each other did nothing. And so these moments that are done so well in the novel of this relationship building between these two, because it's so important to the climax of the story, it's just completely lost in the miniseries, which just hurts the whole thing overall. Speaking of the acting, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, but that wasp scene, that was one of the cooler scenes in the book, and I was really excited to see how they did it, if they did it, in the miniseries. And in the novel, like, it is a big deal. This kid is getting attacked by wasps. There's wasps all over the room. Like, this is a big deal. In the miniseries, it was a minor inconvenience to these characters. The fact that there were hundreds of wasps in their room in the middle of the night was just nothing more than a minor inconvenience. And that bothered me, because that should have been a very cool scene when it was done in the miniseries, but instead it just was laughable. Honestly, it was silly. Danny's age is something that is different in the novel versus the miniseries as well. In the novel, he's 5 years old. In the miniseries, he's 7, played by a 9-year-old. And so some of the innocence that 5-year-old Danny has in the novel is lost in the miniseries. Not a lot, mind you. A 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, not that big of a difference, but there is a difference. And Danny has he even has like a sit and spin joke that he says in the miniseries at the very beginning when they're driving to the Overlook. And it's just like, oh, that's not something a 5-year-old would be saying. And it's because he's not a 5-year-old, he's 7. And so, I don't know, just some of that innocence was lost. And I think that's what hurt some of the charm and some of the naivete, if that's how you say it, of the character. Some of that's lost in the miniseries because he's a little bit older. King makes the conscious decision to kill Wendy and Jack's sex life in the miniseries, which their sex life is totally fine in the novel, and they do it plenty of times. I don't know why they make this decision. It's something that probably has to do with it being a miniseries that was shown on ABC. You can only do so much when you're showing something on ABC versus what you can do in a novel. So I guess I understand why that choice was made. So last but not least was this odd moment in the miniseries where Jack is he's going to the CB radio, and it's where the CB gets destroyed. In the novel, he hears, basically he's influenced to destroy the CB radio by the hotel itself. In the miniseries, he starts hearing the voice of his father, which is really interesting because his father, there's like whole flashbacks dedicated to the relationship between Jack and his father in the novel. And this is really the only instance we get of Jack and his father in the miniseries. So this is one where I thought was actually done pretty well. It was a good way of introducing that father character in a short but memorable and important way. All right, so those were not all of the differences between the miniseries and the book, but those are the ones that I thought were the largest and the most worth talking about. So I know I've missed some, and whatever ones that you wish I would have talked about, please put those down in the comments below. But the main question is, which one is better, the book or the movie? And obviously, if you've been watching this, you already know the answer. The winner is the book. The book is a significantly better story than what is presented in the miniseries. And in fact, because the miniseries is so similar yet so different, as I've just pointed out in the last however long this video is going to end up being, because of that, I really think if you've read the book, you can probably skip the 1997 miniseries altogether because it doesn't add anything unique that is of worth any value, at least. The novel just does everything better. I will say though, if you have read the novel and you've not checked out the Kubrick film, that is absolutely worth checking out. It is different than the novel by a wide margin, but it still presents itself in a very unique and interesting way. And of course, it's a Kubrick film. Of course, it's going to be worth watching. So read the book and watch the Kubrick film, and just go ahead and skip this 5.5 hours of wasted time. Yeah. All right, so that is going to do it for episode 2 of Book versus Movie, The Shining. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. It was a hell of a lot of fun to go through and make this video, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. Please let me know down in the comments below, what other differences did I not talk about that you think I should have? Which one do you prefer, the book, the miniseries, or the Kubrick film? Also, down in the comments below, what other book versus movie episode would you like to see? I know I want to do The Lost World because somebody has already mentioned that in my Jurassic Park episode. So if there's anything else you'd like to see, please leave that down in the comments below and I will do my best to prioritize that for next month. As always, if you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing to Cinefessions here on YouTube. And if not, thank you anyway for watching. I really appreciate it. All right, so I want to say thank you for watching and I'll catch you next time.